Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, potentially, depending on where you may be and when you may be watching this webinar. It is our pleasure to welcome you to When Uncertainty Breeds Clarity, Reimagining Pathways for Financial Education. My name is Michelle Samuels-Jones, and I serve as the Senior Vice President for Equity and Engagement at the National Endowment for Financial Education. It is such an opportunity for us to come together in this moment, in this time. And we are delighted that we're going to dive into a conversation with several of our colleagues who are going to reflect on how they met the moment. And we heard that conversation a lot and that phrase a lot in 2025, how these colleagues stood up to the moment and how they also began to reimagine future moments as we really want to be able to steward the best of our work even in the most unusual of circumstances. A few quick notes before we dive in and get started with this fabulous panel. If you haven't figured it out already, all attendees will be on mute. But we want to make sure that you have an opportunity later in our conversation to engage in a vibrant Q&A discussion. So please do not hesitate to use the Q&A button and offer thoughts in the chat. Our colleague, Greg Morgan, will be stewarding the chat and will also facilitate that conversation later in our time together. Before we jump in, and I introduce our panelists, I would like to invite our President and CEO at the National Foundation for Financial Education to say a few words of welcome. Billy Hensley.
Hello, everyone. For those that we've met, welcome back, and those that are new, welcome. Part of our work at NEFE is to convene, bring people together, talk about issues, talk about successes, talk about what's on our mind, because what we want to do is always be a place, provide a place for reflection, provide a place for community, but not just about what we've experienced, but what we've learned and how we're actively applying what we learned. Sometimes that takes the form of a written report. Sometimes it's a poll that was spurred by a question someone asked in a previous webinar. Sometimes it's just a convening to gather and chat and learn from others. And one of the things that seems to be paramount within what I've seen transpire over the many years I've been working in financial education is that out of these moments of crisis or unanticipated moments, there are opportunities to strengthen not only what we know or what we think we know, more likely, but how we're best positioned to act to serve others. COVID did that for us. We had that moment when we decided to retire direct programming and looking at what's next and what have we learned and how do we adapt our work. Because none of us want to be doing the same work 10 years from now that we're doing now, because the needs are going to change and we're going to evolve. 2025 was an opportunity for NEFE and our partners to double down on the mission and what we do. We wanted to find new pathways or strategies to advance financial well-being for all, no matter where you live, no matter your background or context, your income, what have you. And, we don't have all the answers. That's the whole point of the exercise of this gathering, is that, we want to create these spaces so that you can learn from each other, that we can hopefully provide a sense of stability, a sense of forward momentum and opportunity for all those who need us the most. Thank you for making time for this important reflection, and you're in good hands. Those of you who know Michelle, she's a fabulous facilitator and a brilliant mind. And our panelists, I respect them all. I consider them friends of the field, but also friends of NEFE and just friends. We were even teasing one another. I was doing the teasing before we even went live because we trust each other, and it's a fun community to be in, and I'm grateful for that. And so without further ado, I will hand it over to the brilliance of the panel. Learn a lot and ask good questions.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Billy. I want to lean into, as I introduce our panelists, something that Billy just shared. Oftentimes we create spaces where we are coming ready with solutions and ideas and pathways and strategies. Sometimes the spaces are about being inspired. And so while you're listening in for solutions, we hope that you're listening in to spaces where you can be inspired to think differently, to ask different questions, or to affirm the great work that you're already doing. Okay, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce several phenomenal colleagues who I learn from every day. First, we have Ronica Norvell. Ronica serves as a CEO for Financial Beginnings. She has spent her career in service to communities, from small nonprofits to national organizations. Ronica has raised millions of dollars and expanded programming for education, health, human services, and youth organizations. She has a keen ability to think about how to grow capacities in communities to help both individuals and families thrive. Ronica is dedicated to collaborating with community-based partners to provide equitable financial education for all. Welcome, Ronica. Our next panelist is Justin DeVos. Justin serves as the Financial Education Coordinator for Equity Now Incorporated. Equity Now is an organization focused on advancing generational wealth through tailored educational programming, holistic classroom instruction, financial counseling, community partnerships, and innovative strategies that foster the acquisition of financial literacy skills based on both learners' needs and their lived context. Justin feels a special calling to this work, and he brings an unwavering focus on bridging knowledge to understanding, understanding to action, and action to being empowered, where you can live out lasting change for communities who have often been overlooked or left out of the financial ecosystem. And finally, it is our pleasure to introduce Rukia Kelly. Rukia is the head of corporate impact and engagement at FICO. While many know FICO and associate FICO with credit scores, the breadth of how they work and the work that Rukia leads that focuses on wealth building strategies, financial literacy, and reimagining community impact so that communities who, again, have been left out or locked out have the opportunity to access equitable financial education and literacy is pivotal. And it is also what she calls a calling for herself. Rukia has been instrumental in developing community engagement efforts through nonprofit partnerships that are committed to advancing the needs of underserved communities. Her reach and impact across our financial ecosystem is a critical bridge that similarly launches information into action. Join me in welcoming our panelists, even though you're on mute, clap, do the hand sign, whatever you might do. We are so excited to have you, and I'm going to stop talking except for facilitating the conversations because these are the voices that we want to hear from. Ronica, I'm going to start with you, and we're going to do a little bit of reflection before we pivot to and what we did. So I want to start with all of you by asking you to just describe what you observed or felt or experienced as the greatest disruptions to your organization or your work, or even your partner organizations with whom you work, and how you would characterize those disruptions in 2025. Were they one-time moments? Were they things that were sustained over the course of the year? We just want to hear your voice around that kind of experience from 2025.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I'm so glad to be here with everyone today. I would say the impact was definitely sustained, and is still sustaining. It has been a wild, 2025 was pretty wild. So I would say the biggest things that impact us in a sustained way were just the general uncertainty that was everywhere, and how fast the change pace was. I think that fast-moving change really slowed down the decision making for a lot of organizations and our partners. And so it really changed the pace at which we could work. Personally, as CEO of Financial Beginnings, as a nonprofit, my work is really to stand between the staff and the board to make sure we're all on the same page, to make sure we're all going the same direction, and to lead through some of these times that can be really hard. And I think one of the things that really, I wouldn't call it a disruption, but a change to how I do work is it made me really realize how much I had to do personally to align my personal values and to make sure, when some of these changes don't align with your own personal values, it can be really hard to lead through those times. And so doing a lot of work, a lot of really emotional work to figure out how those changes impact me personally, how that impacts the staff, the organization, and then being able to have those conversations really authentically with staff and board to be able to lead through it. that was a big change for 2025.
Thank you for sharing that, Ronica. Justin, what would you add?
So I would say for us, in 2025, the biggest disruptions, they weren't just operational, they were systemic.
Hmm.
So across our work and our partners' work, we saw multiple sustained pressures, but I would probably say starting at the top was funding volatility. Philanthropy and public dollars became, much more cautious, much more restricted, and, more outcomes driven, often without the increasing support for like backing capacity needed to produce that evidence, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to take this money away from you, but we still want you to deliver above and beyond. And secondly, I would say implementation instability, not only in schools, but in community settings. So you can imagine, what the landscape was and is, right? Staff turnover, shifting calendars, competing priorities, all of that came into play. And the reality is that our educators, our family members, our community members, they were asked to do more, with less time. So how do you juggle that? And then, I would say lastly would be we saw a heightened need for trust building and relevance. So, if you picture, your thinking cap on and picture, yourself in a mind frame of families, where you're navigating inflation stress, you're navigating debt, and just skepticism about institutions in general, right? Starting from the top, even down to your local institutions in your neighborhood, financial education had to feel, I would say, immediately useful, but also culturally responsive and emotionally safe. So, these sustained disruptions, they're still here. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon, but how can we reflect like broader conditions in the economy and education system, um, to not confine it to just it being one singular event, right? This is a long-term game that we're playing. And so our emphasis on partnership and community-driven strategy is central to what we do.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Justin.
Mhm.
Rukia, I want you to respond to this question also from the lens of what you are observing with your partners in particular. But I also want you to pivot us into thinking about what you observed as immediate responses to what folks and organizations were doing. How were folks showing up in the moment in that real-time space?
Yeah, I agree with both what Ronica and Justin mentioned around this sustained uncertainty. I would say what we saw around the disruption, we really saw that volatility across credit and housing and auto finance and household balances. We saw the average credit score actually drop last year, and we talked about that in our FICO Score Credit Insights report. But we also saw that there was a focus more that folks were making sure they were paying their auto loan ahead of some other loans because now we're seeing more gig work, we're seeing DoorDash, we're seeing those side. And so your car was more than just getting you from point A to point B. It actually became your way of making money. But while the disruptions did cause many issues all through 2025. It wasn't that one time. We saw that build up coming in 2024 and it just kind of exploded in 2025. I would say our immediate response was really to focus and and put in some restraints. So early on, it really became clear that doing more active activity wasn't really the answer for us. We needed to be more precise about where our education was showing up and how it connected to access. So within the work that we do with FICO Impact, that meant really prioritizing our education and engagement closer to those moments of financial consequence and not really just these generic awareness campaigns. So we
Mhm.
lean more into those partnerships and programs where education and access were aligned or where we could help to align it. And so in real time, we were able to make those decisions to pause some of our broader efforts and really double down on some of the partnerships that we had and where could we bring more of our programs and signature programs and efforts together in that partnership versus the silo parallel programs that we had in the past. So that allowed us to respond without creating additional risk and really support these nonprofit partners who may have been challenged because of the disruptions.
Thank you, Rikia. That keen awareness to, and I want us to move into this a bit. That keen awareness to understand what is happening in the moment. What do we need to do now to address real-time needs was pivotal. And Ronica and Justin, you also began to speak to that. Could you just share a few more examples of in the moment as you were navigating different things, as we were navigating even shifts in language and what we could say around diversity, equity, and inclusion? What were some of the immediate things that you did or put into place in your respective organizations? Either one of you can go first, please.
I'll say one of the things that we did was really increase the number of conversations we were having. Really doing a lot more listening in community with people, tapping into the expertise that we have in our networks to be able to see, how are you handling this? How is this impacting you? At Financial Beginnings, we do all of our work in partnerships with other organizations like schools and nonprofits. And so we really wanted to adjust our approach to make sure that it was going to be really supportive to those organizations and their learners, because we don't operate, none of us operate in a vacuum here. We all do this work in community.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would say for us, we took DEI and turned it on its head, and we said, okay, if you're going to look at DEI as something negative, then we're going to turn it into dollars, equity, invest, right? And that was something that resonated in our communities because it felt empowering, right? And it was something that our communities, our families, and our young people could definitely attach themselves to say, you know what? If you're going to take this away from me, then I'm just going to circumnavigate around that and try something else that's going to lift me up anyway. So there's nothing you can do to really stop this road that I'm on in terms of financial education and financial wellness. And then, we wanted to essentially just tighten our execution while protecting our impact. So we prioritize, high leverage delivery. We focused on sessions and our partners so that we could drive the strongest outcomes and continuity. And then we also wanted to strengthen feedback loops. So as these changes are happening, we needed to stay in check with our, constituents that we serve. So check-ins with educators, families, children, community members, because we needed that information so that we could continue to adapt and be innovative in what we do.
Awesome. Dollars, equity, and invest. Love it. Trademark it. I'm just kidding. That is so not my lane. I can't even give you any advice there. But what I think is important in what you all are sharing is balancing the needs on the ground, listening. And it's not that we weren't listening to our partners, right, all the time. Of course we are, but we sometimes need to listen in a different way through the lens of impact, real time. And I know that a lot of our work obviously is seeking to be systemic. And this was a moment where we had to say, does the system and the long-term approach that we have in place match the real on the ground needs that we're hearing? And how do we stress test that? How do we know? And how do we do that? And folks were getting very creative with language and leading with, we heard a lot of you talk about how to lead with why you're doing the work and have the words and the language follow, so that folks were not actually co-opting your narratives in a way that was not really the intention of the work or reflective of your mission. I want to pivot us a little bit, because this is one of the things that we constantly heard, particularly from the three of you, that there was a moment where you had to have, of course, one foot on the ground in what is happening, how do we respond real time? But then there was something that says, we can't just stay here. We have to also plan for, as you all have said, the long game. How do we have a foot in strategy at the same time? And so would love to just hear a little bit, even if you can call it out or name it, what were some of the moments or the catalysts or anything that caused you to go, I have to do both simultaneously. I have to be on a parallel track. Rukia, I'm gonna ask you to start with this framing.
Yeah, I would say for me, it was looking at some of the programs that we would um, historically name in support of a community,
Mm,
but we could still support that community. But why were we doing the work? So
mhm,
versus just saying because in the past they were this, we were saying if we don't do this, this is what will continue, or this is the impact that educating and empowering this community could do for the economy, could do for the value that it could bring to the state. And so for me, it was stepping back and again being patient. I think that
mm,
around this time last year, everyone was in a frenzy. What do we need to do? We need to do it now. And there was so much power in taking a pause and reflecting
mm,
on why we created the programs that we created and what did we actually want to solve with those programs. And it caused us to be reflective and be thoughtful around why it was positioned and created and the value that it brings and what would happen if we didn't have it. And so I would say that was probably my biggest pivot at that time.
oh, awesome. Rukia, before I go to Justin to answer the same question, I just want to amplify something that you said. It takes a lot to be able, in the noise and the frenetic pace of a crisis moment, to actually make the choice to pause and say, I have to take a breath and take a beat. Can you talk just a little bit more about the ability to do that and where that came from for you?
For me, well, I will say resilience is one of my top skills. Adaptability is in, when I took the test, they told me I could be adaptable. I would say being in this work, you have to be passionate about it. This is not the type of work that you do and you're like, I just clock in, clock out, and this is all I want to do. You do it because it is something that means something to you. And so with that, you're careful with it, you're patient with it, you understand that it takes time to get through a process and that the pendulum is going to swing every time we turn around. So how do we ensure, I think what this situation brought up for me last year, or this volatility brought up for me, is how do we ground our programs in a way that regardless of who is in office or who is making the rules, that this work still matters.
Mm,
And I wanted to make sure that we were showing up in a way that was reflective of our purpose and our commitment to the work that we were doing. And I knew that I had to pause and take a breath because I understand that it takes time to
mm,
really make change. And
mm,
nothing that we were working on, that need didn't go away because of the changes that were happening politically.
mm.
So grounded in my spirituality, know that we have to take a moment and catch our breath before making big decisions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, and to just be present and think about how do we grow spaces of resiliency? How do we grow spaces of adaptability is going to be foundational to our work moving forward. Justin, I'm
Mhm.
curious, your thoughts and your responses. What caused Equity Now to say, yes, we're in the moment of responding to the needs here, but we also have to keep a foot in the long game? What kind of jolted the organization to be in parallel spaces? Oh, you're on mute. You know that was going to happen at least once, you all, right? Okay. Uh-huh.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. I see. Okay. Well, first and foremost, that word resilience that Rakia brought up, that's what stuck with me. So we went from just reacting to how can we be resilient, right? So, the shift happened for us when we recognized that temporary fixes, were becoming like default in our environment. Like, okay, we're constantly putting out fires, but we're not coming up with solutions to actually prevent the fire, right? So we had to go from, being like tactical with our adaptation. It's always good to adapt, but how can we move into a framework or a process of durable design, right? Something that is sustainable. So we lean into our longer term strategy regarding like institutionalizing access. So Equity Now We are also the charter management organization for Legends Charter School, which is a K through 8 liberal arts college in Lanham, Maryland, 900 students. And beginning in kindergarten, they receive financial education every year. Every grade receives financial education. But we said, okay, it can't just stop here. Like the buck doesn't stop here. How can we actually expand and pour this out into our community? So we began to embed financial education deeply into schools and community hubs rather than just relying on like one-off events. We design, buildable, scalable infrastructure. So curriculum systems, training supports, and just repeatable partner playbooks. So quality just doesn't depend on myself or the CEO at Equity Now, right? So it can be used in multiple different ways. And then I would say more importantly was how can we deepen our wealth building programs and pathways? So for us, looking through the lens of financial wellness, it was more than just financial literacy. How can we shift behaviors and outcomes, right? How can we improve access to saving mechanisms? How can we empower folks to invest in, asset creation products and services? And then I would say more importantly, the practical steps to help families build just long run stability, right? Getting out of your own way, addressing those generational traumas and pre-existing habits first, and then start building a plan on long-term stability. So, that pivot aligns with our broader mission, not just teaching concepts, which I think are great, but how can you expand those pathways to equity through community partnership and just innovative strategies.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Justin. There is so much rooted in not just, and that ties us to the work that's not rooted not only in what we deliver, but how we're making strategic, intentional choices to deliver the work. And going back to something that Ronica, that you said, aligning that with our mission, our vision, our values, and our own belief structures is going to be so critical to, again, how we think about this work moving forward. Veronica, I want to turn to you with this question, and I want to add a layer to it. I'm gonna suggest that this was a pretty intense moment in time to be the leader of an organization, stewarding an organization through immediate tactical decision making and also having a foot in strategy. So I'm curious to hear from your lens a little bit about that experience. And also I'm curious about any missteps as you were stewarding the organization and what we learned from those kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, I think I really resonated with what Rakia said around taking a pause. We were very privileged that we didn't experience any immediate funding cuts like so many nonprofits did. We didn't have any litigation threats coming our way. And so we could take a little bit of a pause and be really strategic. And with our board and staff leadership, we decided we wanted to really meet this moment and boldly address the issues that were coming forward. And so one of the first things that we did to start that was putting together a threats and opportunities list and really looking for both. I think it's so easy to get really stuck in those threats, but looking for the opportunities is really important too. There are opportunities. And really thinking about how can we mitigate threats? How can we take advantage of the opportunities that we have? And then sharing that out with the full staff, with the full board, so that they can be thought partners on it too, and be aware of what's coming and what we might be able to do to mitigate those things. So I think that was a really important piece. I think the misstep that I think of then is making sure that we don't get stuck in that thinking stage and that we boldly move forward with what we want to do with that. I think, looking back, I think we should have moved forward a little bit quicker. We should have made some bold decisions and moved forward and stepped out of that planning phase. But looking back, you learn a lot. I think that's really valuable.
Absolutely. Ergo, the spirit of this conversation. And I want to make sure that I give Rukia and Justin an opportunity to think about looking back, missteps, things you might have done differently or not.
I would say for me, the probably before everything when we saw it bubbling in 2024 and getting things in place, I would say assuming that the existing education delivery models would remain effective under these new conditions. Um, Understanding and but there was so much learned from it, right? Like the turbulence, it was horrible. Wish we did not have to deal with it, but the innovative ideas that came out of it, the new perspectives on how to address financial education, recognizing that the need for understanding policy and working closer with uh, our elected officials and our government relations team so that we can partner on how we can actually impact and support changes within the system itself and not just the programs. They all needed to work together within this ecosystem. So for me, I would say the misstep is waiting, was the wait. I think similar to what Ronica was saying, when we saw it bubbling up back in 24, maybe being proactive in the steps and getting innovative then so that it would not have hurt as hard for some of our partners.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would have to echo the same thing. We as an organization, we collectively took a step back, not to chase after the squirrel that's just scurrying around in the park or, the shiny object and say, you know, are we doing too much? Is doing more a proof of value? We
Mm.
had to really be disciplined about doing the most impactful work. So really just taking a step back to see how are we actually changing lives? That was a major driver for us. Are we actually changing lives? Because we can always do the most work. Anybody can work themselves to death. But are we really changing lives from within? Building financial wellness and capability from the inside out. That's what we wanted to measure and see. And this is where our values came in, our collaboration, our excellence, and commitment to innovation. It became operational, not just aspirational.
Mm, yeah, well said. In one of my previous lives, I used to use the phrase a lot and ask this question, are we busy or are we impactful? Because there is a
Mhm.
difference. And it goes right to what you said, Justin. We can spend a lot of time on things that seem to be the best and even the most popular thing, but is it really making an impact? Do we understand and know what it is that we're trying to shift and change, both at a systems level and a community level, at an individual level? No matter what it might be, are we really clear about impact? Rukia, I want to piggyback on something that you just brought up. And one of the things that came up in a number of spaces was understanding the policy landscape around all the different things that was occurring, or the things that I needed to anticipate in a policy space or even in a practice space that supported my readiness as an organization or even personally as an individual. Curious to hear, how did you navigate policy understanding? Where were your resources to go to learn what you may or may not have known? And just curious for you to share some of the resources that were really helpful to you or what you wish you had.
Yeah, I would say I have a privilege of working very closely with our government relations organization, which I know isn't the case for many corporate impact practitioners. So the staying ahead really required that proximity and not just prediction. So we engaged consistently with policymakers, regulators, practitioners, cross-sector partners to really understand how their systems are evolving and where they see that friction emerging. And so I've also personally invested in my policy fluency by participating in policy workshops that are offered by the Aspen Institute. And then those sessions really reinforce the importance of being able to translate between policy intent, the market behavior, real world consumer impact. So my goal wasn't really to like be able to forecast perfectly, but it was for me to start understanding and recognizing patterns earlier so that I could then design choices and adapt responsibly. So when I talk about what could I have caught in 2024, I don't believe I was as as aware of the political impacts that were coming. And had I had some of that knowledge that I've been able to get through 2025 with Aspen, I can pick up on some of that a lot better and get some of that feedback from my GR team. And then we also, like I said, work closely with regulators. We're a part of Project Reach with the OCC. We have a number of partnerships across, and it's bipartisan, but it allows us to work closely and support initiatives and laws like financial literacy courses being required for graduation and supporting those types of initiatives. And so staying close to partners in that space was really important.
Oh. Monica or Justin, other resources that you utilized to be able to stay abreast of any policy evolutions?
Yeah, I mean, we tapped a lot into our network, definitely with our board members and our corporate partners. But I will also give a big shout out to National Council of Nonprofits. I think their resource that came out that was updated regularly was really great. We're located in Oregon, and the Nonprofit Association of Oregon was incredibly helpful too with local impacts. So I think those kinds of pieces and those organizations, man, they really stepped it up, and I'm really, really grateful for that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Looking for the clap thing so I could clap to that.
I'll do it for you. There we go.
Shameless plug. I went to NEFE, to be honest, to really just dive into the financial education policy work that this great organization is doing. Awesome work, and it has opened my eyes to a number of different things in terms of, advancing financial education and wellness, in the work that I do. Locally in my area, we have partnered and I would say gotten really close to the comptroller of Maryland to really just talk about what we're doing on the ground level and how it relates to her initiatives on a much broader level with the state of Maryland. A couple of weeks ago for what was it, Martin Luther King Day, we had the wonderful and great opportunity to be visited by Governor Wes Moore and to again get his ear and talk about the importance of sustained financial education. So, when your network is your net worth, just getting into those rooms where people can make decisions, even if they don't make it right then and there, but just to let them know that you're here and you want to be heard, I think that's a great start. So for me, it's about continuing to build those connections on a local, state, and also on a national level.
I, Justin, you just really hit on, I think, a critical resource that sometimes we just overlook our backyard, right? And so when we think about the resources and support that is right at our doorstep, that is accessible to us, it's something that we talk about in the organization all the time. Sometimes we think federally about resources and policy changes and shifts. Sometimes we're thinking at a state level, of course. What is in your local regional space? What is in your neighborhood or what have you that could also be a resource, and thinking about what you know, how you know what you know, and also when you don't know what you don't know. And so being able to, you all have used the language of partnership throughout the conversation. How do we cultivate those different kinds of partnerships that do have a direct impact on our work, even though they may be not standing up the work in the same ways that we are. So thank you for raising that. As we are closing in on some of our time, I want to ask a question about advice, and I want us to think about the learnings and how we're taking those learnings into the future. You all have said this is a shift that is not necessarily going away. We're not necessarily going to see a great rollback. A pendulum might swing in many, many different directions, but the learning is what shapes how we think about moving forward. And so would love to hear your voices around the advice you would offer to folks. And you've shared some really, really good pearls of wisdom to best navigate or even better navigate future disruptions. They're going to happen. So how do we get prepared to almost be crisis resilient in our work?
I'm happy to start on that.
Please.
One of the things that I think about a lot is diversification. As financial education champions, we think about that a lot as a piece of being financially healthy. We think about that with our revenue a lot, and it's very important there. But I think the other thing is that it's really important in programming and how you're delivering impact, because sometimes there will be things that aren't working anymore or aren't necessarily making the same impact that it once was making, or it might not be tenable in the new reality that you live in. So, one of the things that we have done is explore all the listening that we're doing is also showing us new ways of making impact that can be really wonderful. So, for instance, one of the things that we heard about all of these states passing legislation that requires financial education in high schools is that teachers are still really struggling. We heard this over and over and over again. So now we have a brand new turnkey program for teachers that helps support them build their own confidence and then also teach to their students, making it really turnkey and supportive. So I think really thinking about what does the moment need, keeping your ear open to those things in partnership that are happening in your communities, and then making bold decisions to try new things and see if they work. And even if they don't, you'll learn something.
Absolutely. Ronica, I want to tag something that is so important that we talked about offline a couple times. This diversification piece was something that we saw among our partners happening. There were some partners who lost funding, for example, and for service delivery work in financial education. But they found a lane and said, wait a minute. We actually know this work so deeply. They became train the trainers for others. And so all of a sudden there were a couple examples of folks who moved into workforce spaces, not to deliver the content, but to all of a sudden be the trainers for the different spaces that were doing the work. We saw lots of innovative ways that folks said, there's a new partnership for us to think about our work and the delivery of our work differently. Are we the ones delivering it? Or are we supporting, like you're saying, are we cultivating knowledge and learning in others to be able to deliver the work differently? Very, very critical thinking about what does it mean and how do we still have the impact, but have the impact through a different lens. Rukia and Justin, advice, strategies for us to be better, more resilient in these moments of change and crisis.
Yeah, I would say for me, where I'm leaning in and kind of that hill that I'm dying on right now is uh, don't treat education and access as separate lanes and really anchor learning to real decisions. We have to design systems that are going to account for volatility and not these ideal behaviors, and resist the urge to place responsibility solely on individuals when their outcomes are really shaped by the structure of the system that they're living within. And so, in order for us to really advance these equitable outcomes, it requires us accountability and empathy at the same time. So, I feel like if a model can't hold both of those things when you're talking about designing your programs, then there's a need to step back and assess what's being designed.
Yeah, wise words. Thank you. Justin.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, they already said what I was going to say, so that's okay. I'll
That's
just.
why I jumped in,
I
Justin.
know you jumped in with the quickness too. I said, man, she beat me to it. But to echo Ronica's and Nakia's points, diversify your sustainability. Have a variety of different funding types. I was a former financial advisor, and I always would preach that you got to diversify, you got to split up your asset classes. So we have to do the same thing as we're talking about our funding streams. Build repeatable partnership models, right? Build a framework, a playbook that you can use over and over and over again. You go back to it, you make adjustments as things change, but you have something, you have a blueprint that you can work from, I think is essential. And protect your core capacity, protect what makes you you. And I would say lastly is keep innovations values driven. So, use new tools and use new strategies, of course, but always come from a place of trust, dignity, and, real wealth building pathways. And to really go back to what Ronica said, this is something that we have been doing for the past 6 years is we have been coupling social and emotional learning with financial education because we
Mm,
know that those two really do go hand in hand, especially in times like this. So really consider how people think and feel about money as we're trying to change lives.
that's
Mm.
awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm busy writing. Justin is like my new I'm going to say reference thesaurus maybe for like language that is so powerful to help capture where we need to be moving to. So thank you, Justin. I'm also just going to share a couple things that we were learning at NEFE during this time before we pivot to hear questions from our chat. We were hearing a lot of folks saying and shifting the kind of research and data and information they were collecting. And not everybody was able to do that real time, but folks are coming out of this space of last year saying, you know, the evidence that we collect and the why of how we do the work may need to shift. And folks are really thinking about what is the data and the research that we need, not just to prove that our organization is viable,
Mm.
not just to prove that our organization is healthy, but what's the data, the impact, again, going back to what you all are saying, what is the impact data that is modeling and demonstrating that we are, for example, that our work is helping those that we serve contribute to the economy differently?
Mm.
How are we working specifically? Can we show some kind of relationship between the work that we're doing and success in educational institutions or retention in different spaces? So folks were really doubling down and asking some different questions. There are still more questions than answered in that space, but the research space is exploding in different ways and asking some different kinds of questions. And it's so awesome to be able to lean into our research team within NEFE who are asking some of those same questions. What are we not asking in some ways that we should be to be able to have an evidence-based approach, not just to, again, affirm the work that we've done, but forecast the work that lies ahead and really thinking about those things intentionally. You all have also talked about partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. So one thing that was very clear is folks were like, oh my gosh, we are all in the same or similar boat. Let's come together differently. And so, Ronica, I remember you saying to me, I saw silo walls coming down quickly. I saw people reaching out who had never reached out before. We saw different partnerships emerging because the financial pool got smaller. And folks were saying we need to be able to come together and make the same ask and figure out how it's going to support multiples of us at the same time. So just some really creative and innovative spaces. So we're going to pause there. And Greg, Morgan, I think you're going to come back on and we may have a question or two from the chat that we want to be able to respond to.
We do. And the button should be called Q&A and thank yous because we got a lot of thank yous of the panelists for everything that you're doing. So, well, first and foremost on that. A couple questions here, and a lot of them ask similar questions, so I'm sort of going to combine them into one. One we got was, how can we show the value of financial education when some people feel that it's not an effective tool against structural systemic barriers, like affordable housing, food access, et cetera?
I would say what Michelle touched on around showing what happens if we don't take action
Mm.
and being able to have the data to say, if we don't do this work, what is this going to do to this community or to your state or to your economy? What is the impact of investing in these tools? I will also say that financial education has to be partnered with access. So when we're going in and we're talking about how this financial literacy and how financial literacy works and credit works, being able to support those who are receiving that education with next steps on being able to access. If and it's not a one size fits all. We can't take what we teach in an urban community and take it out to a rural community. The access is different. The availability is different. And so we have to ensure that we're partnering that education with access, and then we're also proving if we don't take action, this will be the impact to your local economy.
I wholeheartedly agree. I would say, you know, choose my words carefully. Financial education or the lack thereof is a civil rights issue. Um, and it should be treated as a core academic right. You know, one of the first things that
Mhm.
we grow up learning is how to read, how to write, right? But no one teaches you how to save your money or how to really budget or how to prepare for when things go wrong. You kind of have to learn the hard way. So it should be more than just enrichment. It should be something that is required, especially in our education system. Because when systems fail communities, then it's up to us to build those new systems, right? So going back to partnership, partnership, partnership. There are tons and tons of nonprofits, for-profits that do this work, but we can no longer operate in silos. We have to come together for the common good and, make that determination. Hey, here are the issues, and we have the power and the tools to change them. Let's do it collectively instead of on our own. So that's where I stand with that.
Veronica, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think when I think about this question, I think sometimes people have these expectations for quick change in a problem that has existed for a really long time in a systemic way.
Mm, mm,
Mhm, mhm,
And so sometimes that's really hard to prove out. But there is good research from people like NEFE that show the impact of financial
mhm,
education. And I would say this is a moment where it's needed more than ever. Uh,
mhm.
consumer sentiment is lower than it's ever been. And people, this is one of the opportunities that I see coming out of this time. More people are realizing the need for financial education and
mhm.
leaning in new ways. So I think that's a tide that's turning.
Yeah, I would agree. So I'm going to say ditto, tritto, quadritto. I'm making up words to what my colleagues have said. And I'm going to channel Dr. Billy Hensley, Dr. Beth Bean, and every colleague I have at NEFE to say, we know that financial education alone is not the capital letter answer. To change systems and to do those kinds of things. It's one part of a larger ecosystem that has to come together and understand how each of the pieces work for the systems change. Semicolon. Nevertheless, there is deep research that does demonstrate, and we're moving away from defending financial education and just saying it works, we're doing the thing. And there's such great research that points to how financial education, financial literacy does impact not even just my knowledge and my understanding and my financial well-being, but holistically, how I'm able to move about and move through the world. It's one of the reasons why we know the work in healthcare, for example, that looks at the social determinants of health, looks at financial well-being and financial education as a part of health and wellness holistically. And so, but it's such a critical question. I just want to again amplify. We know that FinEd alone is not the answer, but we do have to have a systemic lens when we think about financial education, our delivery, who is opting in, who we're opting out, even unintentionally, and how we have to address our work at a systems level, in addition to an individual and community level for the shift to really be felt, heard, and observed in very, very meaningful way with evidence. Okay. Greg, other questions?
Yes, they're pouring in now. A lot of questions on data sources. I'm going to try and synthesize some of these. Are there any data sources or findings that you point to that show why financial wellness matters specifically for college students? There's another question about data points or outcomes that most influence executive buy-in. And Rakia, there's one specific question. You made a comment about creating education that supports two models. People are wondering what those two models are. What are the two models that education needs to support? So take any and all of that.
You said the two models.
Yeah, you commented about creating education that supports two models. What are the two models that education needs to support?
So it needs to support both. Are we referring to the rural and urban area, or I'm trying to recall when I said that? But I would say education needs to support what we're doing within the entire family and not just the child. We're pushing it for schools, but oftentimes missing out on the familial experience that's happening. So I will say that is two areas it needs to happen in. I would say we need to be mindful of the communities in which the education is being provided. Again, that one size fits all is it does not work for financial literacy. We need to have culturally relevant content when we're providing it to communities. So I apologize. I don't recall when I talked about the two models, but those are points that I want to make sure are clear. And then for data points, I will say there was a Financial Times article that came out around the impact of financial education and the GDP. So I can look for that link, but I'm sure NEFE has so many of them. And then for college, I would say HEFWA is an organization that's focused on higher education financial wellness as well.
Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah.
Just
So
to
the
add
question
to
again
that,
is,
oh,
I'm sorry, Michelle.
I was
Question
going to
again is
say,
just, go ahead.
who's
You're
going?
ready.
Okay,
You're ready.
so I was going to add to that. I love the data questions, and there's a variety of data sources. There are meta-analysis that have been conducted and so forth, and we have a lot of that information linked on our website. What I do think an important takeaway is, and I think I'm committing myself to something, is because I want to be sensitive to time as well. A critical takeaway is we've observed this and we need to be better about this is where can we have these, for lack of a better term, warehouses of data that or centralized spaces that folks can get access to be able to pull things down, understand the interpretation of those. And at the very least, I think one of the outcomes of this webinar can be identifying some of the more meaningful research studies and things that people can reference and being able to get that out to the audience as a part of this conversation. So as a step, I am raising my hand. My name is Michelle Samuels Jones, and I'm raising my hand to commit to making sure that we capture some of these really good data questions and get some FAQs out about where you can go to dive into the data. Greg,
Okay.
anything else for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming up on the top of the hour, so I think this is a good one to sort of end on is what is one specific systems level change you would like to see evolved in terms of equity?
I would say for me, we are now that the requirement for financial literacy as a course to graduate, I think is great, but I feel like it's a first step. It should be something that's embedded. So it sounds like with what they're doing at Justin's organization, it should be a core aspect of learning, starting with relationship with money in kindergarten all the way through graduation. So that would be a system change that I would love in my perfect world.
I'll second that one. And I'll add, I often think about systems and where financial wellness should live. I would love to see healthcare take this up as a bigger piece of what they're doing in social determinants of health. And I would love to see financial wellness and financial coaching being covered by insurance. I'm gonna dream big. I'm gonna try
Dream
it out
big.
there.
Yes,
Yeah.
why not?
Again, I don't have anything else to say. No, but Rukia and Reneka, those are such great points. I was saying start as early as you can, right? Kindergarten is one of the things that we do is our classrooms are named after Fortune 500 companies. So you're a kindergartner who walks into the Google Classroom or the Netflix or Disney, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so happy to be a part of Disney." And then we start to really build into them why we did this intentionally. And then as they matriculate throughout their school career, they get it, right? So by the time you leave eighth grade, you're already prepared with the tools and resources to be financially well. Start early because that learning and knowledge will compound, no pun intended, for their lives.
Yeah, awesome. I will just quickly add, and this is where we run into challenges about when we think about systems. I constantly talk about identity conscious approaches to our work at a systems level. We are not all coming from the same place, from the same experience, from the same lived experience. And so if we neglect and choose not to center identity conscious approaches, not just in curriculum, but in the way that we structure learning, in the way that we amplify learning, in the way that we operationalize the outcomes of learning, we are going to miss it. We are going to miss it. And so that will continue to be important when we think about this at a systems level, so that we can come together to accomplish a lot of these other pieces that are so important to be able to keep moving us forward. All right, we are at the top of the hour, and I just want to again thank our panelists, Ronica Norvell, Rukia Kelly, and Justin DeVos. Thank you so much for taking time to share your thoughts and wisdom. As we started at the top and said in the beginning, some of this may have been like a great solution for you to adopt. Some of this may have been inspiration, and we hope that moving forward, this conversation continues. Please continue to reach out, support each other, and be thoughtful about the ways in which we are serving those that we continue to want to amplify and uplift. Greg, final words.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today. And we will be sending a recording out to everyone that registered. For more information on our webinar series, visit nefe.org. And while you're there, you're invited to subscribe to our e-newsletter. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, X, Facebook, and Medium. Thanks again, and have a great day.